Hello and welcome to this next video on mobile repairing. We've been trying to understand a lot about how we can do jumper settings for different faults in the mobile phone. And as you already know, jumper setting is one way of trying to connect broken circuits whenever there is a circuit that's open or not connected properly between two components. For example, we've earlier seen a battery connector fault where the connection between the battery and the MFP or internal components has not been intact, and we tried using a jumper wire to connect it to the different components. You can do jumper settings wherever there is an internal breakage in the circuit system on the mobile phone PCB. In today's video, we will try and understand how we can use jumper settings whenever we find a network related fault. What is a network related fault? A network related fault could mean many things. Among all of them, the first and foremost would be the power supplied to the network IC may not be reaching it because there is a breakage in the circuit on the mobile phone PCB. This could result in the network not connecting at all because the network IC has no power to function. There could also be other network related problems such as low power for the network, or the antenna signal in your mobile phone shows very less connectivity or randomly increases or decreases the network connectivity irrespective of the actual signal strength in a particular area. Many of these faults could be repaired by checking whether the connectivity between different aspects or network components on the PCB are intact or not. If the connectivity is not intact, you can try and use a jumper wire to try and connect these components to ensure that the connectivity is re-established and the network fault in your mobile phone PCB is rectified. So first of all, let's try and understand how we can check the power supply between the battery connector and the network component. We place the multimeter on the beep testing mode. We check which is the negative or positive terminal on the battery connector. And once we have identified the positive terminal on the battery connector, we will try and place the probes of the multimeter on the one end on the positive side of the battery connector and the other point on one of the positive points of any of the components in the network section of the mobile phone. Now, in order to do any of this, please be aware that you must be sure of the network circuit diagram of a mobile PCB. So please ensure you study the circuit diagram very clearly. In this mobile phone, the top portion that you see here is the network section, and this is where all the network related components are placed. So you will have to first check whether the battery connector is properly connected to the first element which will fall in line in the network component section. Please study the circuit diagram carefully before you try this out on any mobile phone. An incorrect connection could result in the mobile phone or the PCB not functioning or can even develop further complications. So it's important to study the circuit diagram clearly. Now the first checkpoint that we're going to be testing here is the connection point between the battery connector's positive end to one of the condenser which is placed next to the PFO. The PFO, as you know, is a device that's placed in the network section, and we understood about the PFO in one of our earlier videos. So you need to check the positive connection between the condenser next to the PFO and the battery positive point. As you can see, we're going to place one probe on the positive of the condenser next to the PFO and check whether there is a beep. If you hear a beep, it means that these two components are working perfectly fine. If there is no beep between these two components, that could mean that the internal connection in the circuitry on the PCB has been broken at some stage, and it's important to establish this connectivity back from the battery connector's positive tip to the positive point of the condenser next to the PFO. Now, while you are doing this, please be very careful on where you are placing your probes. Now, in order to place it at the right position, you must understand the circuit diagram of the respective mobile phone that you are trying to work with. So once we have identified that there is a connectivity problem here, we will take the jumper wire, and as mentioned in one of our earlier videos, you need to clean up one end of the jumper wire. This is primarily to remove the insulation material on the jumper wire. Once the insulation material is removed from the jumper wire, we will then place it at these 2 points and try and solder it onto the PCB. Let's take a little bit of soldering wire lead and place one end of the jumper wire on the positive terminal of the battery connector. So, on the back side there is a positive terminal. We will connect one end of the jumper wire to this and then cut out the respective length as required to connect it to the network component. Once we cut it out, we take the other point and remove the insulation from the tip of the other point as well. So, we are using a soldering iron, micro soldering iron, to remove the insulation material on top. Thereby, it will ensure that it holds on correctly to the respective component points. So, once you have removed the insulation material, we will now take a little bit of soldering wire and try and solder it to the positive point of the condenser we identified. Now, please ensure that you only remove as much insulation as is required for you to solder. Removing insulation in any other point on the jumper wire can result in the jumper wire coming in contact with other points and can result in short circuit on the PCB. Now, while you are soldering it on to the component, be very careful and ensure that you place a little bit of soldering wire in the positive end of the component. That way, you are enabling the jumper wire to be fitted appropriately at the right position. While you are doing this, also be careful not to disturb any of the other components adjoining the condenser. This can result again in short circuitry and can even result in malfunctioning of the mobile PCB. So, once we have soldered it on to this end, we will just re-ensure that it is connected to the positive point of the battery connector. Unfortunately, while we were trying to solder it, the positive point has come off from its position. So, let us try and place it back and solder it in its correct position. We are soldering the positive point back on the back side of the battery connector using the soldering iron, and once you have soldered it, the jumper wire connection is complete. Always ensure that you have a little extra length of the jumper wire just to ensure that it does not come off or break off easily due to movement of the mobile phone later. As you can see, now the jumper wire is connected between these 2 points and the connectivity between these 2 points has been re-established. Now, similarly, you can go on and checking the connectivity between multiple components on the mobile PCB. In case the connectivity between the battery connector and this condenser is intact, you may then move on to the next section of the entire network circuit and check whether the connectivity between the next section is intact or not. With this, you will be able to identify exactly the position where the circuit has broken and use a jumper wire to connect those 2 points and re-establish connectivity between those 2 points. Now, such jumper wire settings can also be done in other situations, such as extending the network to the antenna as well. Many a times, the network tip or the antenna tip connectivity could also be broken, and that could result in poor network or irregular network on the mobile phone. Even in that situation, once you look at the circuit diagram, you will be able to figure out which 2 points need to be connected using a jumper wire, and you can try and connect those 2 points using a jumper wire to ensure that the network is regularized on the mobile phone PCB. So, whenever you are repairing any of the internal component faults, the first step that you need to do is to check whether connectivity is intact between different components on the mobile PCB. If the connectivity is not correct, you may need to re-establish connectivity using jumper wire settings for different components. Once jumper wire settings are placed, then you may want to restart your mobile to check if the problem has been sorted out. If not, even after jumper settings are in place, even if the problem has not been sorted out, you may want to go into the component level or the chip level to try and determine where there could be problems and try and solve it in the mobile PCB. So far we have seen some problems that commonly arise in mobile phones, and we've also understood how we could use jumper wire to try and re-establish connectivity if there are connectivity problems in the circuit of a PCB. Going forward, we will try and go a little more deeper into the chip components of the mobile phone PCB and try and understand how we can rectify faults that arise at the chip level on a mobile phone PCB. We do hope you would have learnt all of these very well. Continue practicing, because practice is what makes you perfect while you are working on any of these aspects. Thank you very much.